Have you heard the harrowing tale of the girl in the box? A young woman's resilience tested in the darkest of confines, an unimaginable reality, a life-shattering transformation. Will she ever escape? Join us to unravel the chilling true crime story that will leave you breathless. Now, as we prepare to dive into our story, make sure you're comfortable. Are you ready? It's story time. Colleen Stan woke to the sound of birds outside her window, the soft morning light painting patterns on her bedroom wall. She stretched, cat-like, a lingering dream of adventure still dancing behind her eyelids. Outside, the world beckoned, an inviting canvas of possibilities. She had always been a free spirit, a sparrow bristling against the confines of the cage. The idea of hitchhiking had taken root in her head a while back. The allure of the open road, the thrill of meeting new people, and the chance to see life in all its raw, unfiltered beauty. For Colleen, it was freedom. It was adventure. It was living. She stared at her reflection in the worn-out mirror, her fingers tracing the faint lines of worry that etched her young face. She had her demons, her shares of heartbreaks and struggles, but she also had an indomitable spirit and a fire in her heart that refused to die. Maybe, just maybe, this journey would help her escape her ghosts, find herself on those endless highways. She threw a few essentials into her backpack, her fingers brushing against the small locket that held a picture of her and her mom, a reminder of the love and warmth of home she was momentarily leaving behind. With a final look around the familiar room, she zipped up the bag. Today was the day. She was going to hitchhike, come what may. On the roadside, she waited, her thumb outstretched in the age-old symbol of a hitchhiker. The wind played with her hair, the morning sun kissing her cheeks. She was ready to embrace whatever the road threw her way. She was on a journey to find herself, unaware that what she would find would test the very fabric of her existence. A speck of dust appeared on the horizon, growing larger and louder, eventually manifesting as a vehicle. A deep blue van trundled down the sun-baked road, engine humming a low and steady rhythm. Colleen's heart echoed that rhythm, a twinge of excitement threading through her veins. The van came to a halt a few feet away. The dust cleared, revealing two faces peering at her from the front seat. Cameron and Janice Hooker, a couple in their 30s, were returning from a camping trip upstate. Cameron with his disarming grin, his easygoing demeanor, and Janice, her soft smile framed by freckled cheeks, radiating a warmth that seemed to dissolve the invisible walls of strangerhood.
Need a ride, sweetheart?
Cameron's voice broke through the hum of the engine, his eyes sparkling with what Colleen interpreted as kindness. Janice's smile widened in agreement, her head nodding encouragingly. They seemed nice, trustworthy. Colleen felt a wave of relief wash over her. She thanked them and hopped in, stashing her backpack between her feet. Cameron asked about her destination, his voice filling the confined space of the van. Colleen was going to Sacramento, she shared, and they happened to be heading the same way. The conversation flowed easily, the initial awkwardness melting into shared laughs and tales. Colleen looked out the window, her heart swelling with the beauty of the landscape that unfolded with every passing mile. The promise of adventure was beginning to materialize, and she was right in the middle of it. Suddenly, the easy laughter that filled the van halted. The absence of Cameron's voice seemed to swallow the confined space whole, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. The atmosphere in the van shifted, like an unwelcome shadow creeping over a sunny afternoon. Cameron's previously warm eyes now held a cold glint, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. Janice, the friendly woman with the comforting smile, was no longer looking at her. Instead, she stared blankly ahead, her face an unreadable mask. The initial shock turned into dread when Colleen saw the knife. It was a simple thing, nothing menacing about it in itself, yet in Cameron's hand, it was a harbinger of doom. Colleen's blood turned to ice, her breath hitched, and a primal fear seized her.
Put these on.
Cameron's voice sliced through the heavy silence, tossing her a pair of handcuffs. His tone was devoid of any previous warmth, replaced with a chilling command. Colleen's mind reeled. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. She tried to fight, tried to scream, but her strength seemed to drain away as if sucked into a black hole. She struggled against the biting cold metal of the cuffs, the raw terror filling her eyes, reflecting in Cameron's cold, uncaring ones. And just like that, Colleen Stan, the girl who sought adventure, the girl who believed in the goodness of strangers, was captured. Her journey had taken a horrifying turn, descending into a nightmare she couldn't wake from. She was trapped, her optimistic spirit quelled by a stark, chilling reality she could never have imagined. Trapped in a reality far more horrifying than any nightmare, Colleen Stan's journey took a turn deeper into the belly of despair. Her new abode? A coffin-like structure, Cameron and Janice called it the box. It wasn't a home, but a chilling testament to her captor's inhumanity. Cameron unveiled it with an eerie sense of pride, as if revealing a masterstroke of twisted creativity. The box was simple, plain even, yet its simplicity belied the terror it held. Designed for one purpose alone, containment, it was a cold, dark space devoid of any comfort or humanity. The first time Colleen was pushed into the box, her screams filled the stale air. Her pleas for mercy, her desperate cries echoing off the unyielding walls, fell on deaf ears. A sickening thud reverberated as the lid shut, plunging her world into an abyss of darkness. Every breath was an effort, the air stale and suffocating. The claustrophobic confines of the box encroached on her sanity, pushing her to the precipice of a mental chasm from which she feared there would be no return. The chilling stillness was interrupted only by the thumping rhythm of her own frantic heartbeat and the shallow breaths she drew in the darkness. Days blurred into nights, a timeless existence where the only reality was the enclosing darkness and the unending horror. She wept till her tears ran dry, screamed till her voice turned hoarse. And when she had no strength left, she succumbed to an exhausted sleep, only to wake up and relive the nightmare all over again. The darkness inside the box was like a thick, inky soup that swallowed her whole. The lack of space was suffocating, pushing her into the corners of her own mind. Isolation gnawed at her spirit, slowly tearing away at the fabric of her sanity. The utter despair was almost tangible, an ever-present entity that held her in its cold grip. It whispered fears into her ear, never letting her forget the monstrous reality of her situation. The silence was broken only by the echoes of her own breaths and the erratic drumming of her heartbeat, a grim reminder of her solitary existence. The metallic taste of terror was ever present on her tongue, her senses overwhelmed by the raw desolation. The tangible fear of the unknown made her stomach churn. Was she forgotten, discarded by the world outside? She yearned for a sliver of light, a simple proof that life beyond the box existed. But all she knew was the black void, a universe shrunk to fit within the confines of her prison. The box, though devoid of any physical comfort, began to morph into something more sinister. It became the embodiment of her fear, despair, and hopelessness. Her reality shifted, twisted, becoming a landscape of psychological horrors that seemed to revel in her suffering. But amidst the tidal wave of despair, Colleen held on to the fragile thread of her humanity. She tried to calm her racing heart, steady her erratic breaths. Her fingers traced invisible patterns on the cold, unyielding surface, each one a silent plea for freedom, a desperate attempt to cling on to her dwindling sanity. Living in the box was not merely about physical endurance, but a battle of wills, a grueling test of her mental fortitude. She was trapped, not just within the physical confines of the box, but also in a mind that was rapidly becoming a terrifying battleground. In the unyielding blackness, time turned treacherous. Minutes blurred into hours, hours melded into days, and soon Colleen lost all sense of time. The relentless monotony was as maddening as the fear itself. Yet within this horrifyingly repetitive existence, she started to adjust, to adapt. She began to mold herself to the contours of her terrifying reality, her body and mind becoming familiar with the form of her confinement. She measured time by the rhythm of her heartbeats, marking off the endless hours with every pulsating throb that echoed within the confines of the box and her own skull. Her senses, devoid of any stimulation, began to amplify the smallest details. The smell of the box's interior, the texture of the cold metal against her skin, the taste of her own fear. Her survival became a series of rituals. She listened to her own breathing, her ragged inhalations and shaky exhalations becoming the only soundtrack to her life. She embraced the silent solitude, her thoughts her only companions. She nurtured the spark of hope within her, letting it grow into a tiny flame in the face of the overwhelming despair. She realized that her mind, more than her body, was her ultimate prison. The despair, the fear, the loneliness, they were all constructs of her mind, distortions of her reality. And so, Colleen decided to combat them the only way she knew how, by cultivating resilience, by nurturing hope, and by clinging stubbornly to her will to survive. But beneath it all, the fear remained, lurking in the corners of her mind. It was a constant reminder of her chilling reality. Yet, with every passing moment, every ticking second, Colleen was learning to endure it, to live with it, and, in her own way, to fight it. Months passed, or at least what Colleen could assume were months. Her only contact with the outside world was through the thin veil of the box, the filtered sounds and smells of a life that was once hers. Then came the hunger pangs, gnawing at her insides. They were followed by periods of disorienting weakness, each attack worse than the last. Every meal, when it came, was a form of salvation. She savored each morsel, each drop of water, as if they were ambrosia and nectar. She felt the first sign of winter creep in through the metal confines of the box. The cold became unbearable. Her skin seemed to cling to the freezing metal. It was a test of her spirit, another challenge to endure. Then one day or night, she couldn't really tell anymore, a profound realization washed over her. Colleen understood that her life had changed irrevocably. There was no going back to who she once was. The optimistic hitchhiker was long gone. In her place was a survivor, hardened by adversity and struggle. Her spirit, once free and buoyant, was now confined yet unbroken. She clung onto the memories of the world she once knew, the family she left behind. They became her refuge, her beacon in the darkness. She was a captive, but she wouldn't let them break her. Each day in the box was a battle won, a testament to her spirit's refusal to surrender. In the face of unimaginable horror, Colleen was still fighting, still surviving. As the chilling air seeped through the seams of the box, Colleen closed her eyes, her breath slow and steady, her heart firm and resolved. She was still here. She was still alive. The darkness couldn't take that away from her, and so, despite the terrible conditions, her spirit never wavered. This was her reality now, but she wouldn't let it become her end. She would endure, she would persist, she would survive. And with that thought, Colleen Stan, the girl in the box, embraced the darkness once more. The days bled into nights, and the nights into days, all sense of time distorted in the unyielding darkness of the box. It was a world with no sunrise or sunset, no change in season, and no rhythm of life. The ceaseless blackness began to warp Colleen's perception of reality, a chilling void that sought to swallow her whole. Cameron was not just content with physical captivity. He sought to shackle her mind, to dictate her every thought, her every feeling. His voice, a relentless whisper in the dark, became the warped lens through which Colleen viewed her existence.
Remember, you're here because you want to be,
he would say, his voice chillingly calm. The blatant lie turned into a litany, a mantra she was made to repeat till the words lost all meaning. His voice echoed in the silence, a ghastly symphony of manipulation that gradually chipped away at her resistance. Every flinch, every tear, every plea for mercy was met with an onslaught of punishments, conditioning her to accept her grim reality. Pain became the language of their interaction, a twisted dialect that aimed to strip away her humanity. The reality she once knew was now a distant memory, replaced with the harrowing torment of her new existence. Her captor became her world, his voice the only human sound, and his rules the law. The line between Colleen and the woman Cameron wanted her to be began to blur. This was the reality distortion, the beginning of her transformation. But within her, there was still a tiny spark, a vestige of the woman she was, the woman she refused to let go of. It was this spark that would become her secret weapon in the psychological warfare that lay ahead. In the relentless darkness of her confinement, the silence was as torturous as the biting cold. The silence was oppressive, a void that swallowed her thoughts and magnified her fears. But in this silence, Colleen began to hear something else, the quiet whispers of her own mind. She found herself reaching into the recesses of her memory, drawing out fragments of her past. She saw herself as a child, running in fields of sunflowers, her mother's warm voice echoing with laughter. She remembered her first heartbreak, the taste of her tears, and the strength she found in her own resilience. She pictured the open road, her thumb outstretched, and the boundless freedom it promised. Each memory, each emotion was a rebellion against the narrative Cameron sought to impose on her. They became her secret refuge, her private rebellion against the tyranny of her captor. At times, she would talk to herself in her mind, a gentle whisper that reassured her of her existence, of her identity.
"You are Colleen Stan,"
she would say.
"You are not what he wants you to be."
She realized that while Cameron could control her body, he couldn't invade her mind, not completely. It was in these stolen moments of mental solitude that she found a strength she didn't know she had, a strength that would challenge the monster that lurked outside her box. And so, despite the horrors that surrounded her, Colleen found a way to survive. She discovered a beacon of hope within her, a flame that refused to be extinguished, a spirit that refused to be broken. Outside of her mental sanctuary, the monster continued his reign. Every day, Cameron would unleash new torments, each designed to break her spirit, to make her bow down to him, to transform her into the obedient slave he desired. He would beat her, starve her, deprive her of light, of air, of humanity. She knew he was winning. She felt the erosion of her will, the seepage of despair. Her mental fortress began to crumble, the beacon of hope flickering perilously. His words became her reality, his decrees her gospel. She found herself anticipating his commands, striving for his approval, craving his mercy. Days turned into weeks, then months. A disturbing pattern emerged, a twisted dance between tormentor and captive. He would inflict pain, and she would yield, the darkness closing in on her with each passing day. But amidst the torment, she clung to the remnants of her humanity. She would allow him to chain her body, but she would fight to the end to keep her mind free. Yet the constant battle drained her, the thin line between resistance and surrender growing fainter. One night, Cameron dragged her out of her box. His eyes were different that night, not cold and impassive, but fevered, manic. He said he had a surprise that would change everything. His laughter echoed in the silence, bouncing off the walls, a harbinger of an impending nightmare. His surprise turned out to be a small mirror. She hadn't seen her own reflection in what seemed like lifetimes. The face staring back at her from the grimy, cracked surface was a stranger's. Sunken eyes, skin stretched over prominent bones, hair matted and wild. He watched her closely as she traced the gaunt, unfamiliar features with trembling fingers. His lips curved into a sick, satisfied smile, basking in the horror etched on her face. The mirror, a cruel reminder of what she had become, of what he had made her. Suddenly, the fight within her seemed to collapse. The defiance, the stubborn resistance, it all fell away in the face of this horrifying reality. What was the point, she wondered, of fighting when the enemy had already won? His laughter rang in her ears long after he had left, leaving her alone with her shattered reflection. She was no longer Colleen. the brave, the adventurous. She was a creature of his making, broken and remade in his grotesque image. That night, the girl in the mirror wept for the loss of the girl she once was. She mourned for her dreams, her hopes, her freedom. She mourned for the girl who had dared to hitchhike on a sunny May afternoon, believing in the kindness of strangers, unknowing of the monstrous fate that awaited her. In the confines of her box, her transformation was complete. She had become his object, his possession, his slave. The last flicker of rebellion extinguished, Colleen Stan ceased to exist. In her place, a creature of survival emerged, born of fear, molded by torment, hardened by despair. And so, under the crushing weight of her circumstances, she submitted to the will of her captor. With that, the transformation was complete. Colleen Stan was no more. There was only the girl in the box. Janice had watched from the sidelines, a silent witness to the horrifying transformation of Colleen. She was aware of the brutality her husband Cameron was capable of. But seeing it inflicted on another human being, a girl not much different from herself, stirred something deep within her. She found herself stealing glances at Colleen, at the girl who was no more, at the creature who had taken her place. It was like looking into a distorted mirror, a reflection of her own suppressed suffering, and she felt a jolt of empathy that took her by surprise. There was something about Colleen's silence, her surrender that spoke volumes to Janice. She saw in it her own silent cries, her own submission to Cameron's control. She felt a pull, a strange connection with the girl in the box. It was an unsettling realization, but also a compelling one. As the days passed, Janice found herself drawn to Colleen, not as an object of her husband's deranged fantasies, but as a fellow sufferer. She saw in her a reflection of the woman she had become under Cameron's control. The connection was unspoken, a silent acknowledgement of shared pain. It was in the fleeting glances they exchanged, in the brief moments of quiet when Cameron was not around. It was subtle, yet potent, a bond forged in the fires of shared suffering. Janice felt her empathy growing, transforming into something more profound. She started to see Colleen not as an object, but as a human being. She saw her spirit, broken but resilient, her will, suppressed but not extinguished. And with this realization, the seeds of empathy were sown, giving rise to something that Janice hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope for herself and hope for Colleen. It was the beginning of an unseen bond that was about to change their lives forever. The growing empathy Janice felt for Colleen was not without its own terrors. It was as if she had awoken a sleeping beast, and now it was snarling in the darkness, demanding to be acknowledged. She began to see Cameron's actions for what they truly were, not acts of a loving husband or a master, but a tormentor, a monster. With each passing day, her husband's actions became more and more abhorrent, and the creature he had become was more monster than man. It was a terrible realization. How could she not have seen it before? How could she have accepted his actions as normal? The guilt washed over her like a tidal wave, threatening to drown her. But she couldn't turn a blind eye anymore. She couldn't pretend that this was normal. As her empathy for Colleen grew, so did her disdain for Cameron, the monster who wore the mask of a husband. She saw his manipulative tricks, his control, and his wickedness for what it truly was. But along with this growing revulsion came fear. Fear of what Cameron might do if he discovered her changing loyalties. Fear of the monster he could become if provoked. This was a precarious game she was playing, a dangerous tightrope. But she couldn't ignore her conscience anymore. The shared moments with Colleen were brief, but profound. They were fleeting instances of humanity in an otherwise monstrous existence. These moments were a stark contrast to the harsh reality of their lives, small glimmers of hope in the engulfing darkness. Her empathy for Colleen was not just a shared understanding anymore. It was a quiet rebellion, a silent protest against the monster they both lived with. Janice knew that she was treading dangerous waters, but she also knew she couldn't turn back. Not anymore. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Janice's resolve began to take form. A daunting task lay ahead, but she clung on to her decision like a lifeline, a flicker of hope in a sea of despair. She began to observe Cameron, noting his routines, his mood swings, his unpredictable bursts of rage. She learned to read the signs, to anticipate when he would be most vulnerable and when he was at his most volatile. Simultaneously, she worked to build trust with Colleen. Subtle gestures, quiet words of comfort when Cameron wasn't around. She started sharing tiny portions of her own meals, sneaking them to Colleen when Cameron was away. However, this was not without risk. Every step she took felt like a dance with death, a game of Russian roulette. One wrong move, one slip of the tongue, and it could mean doom for both of them. The fear was a constant companion, chilling her to the bone, keeping her on the edge. Yet, through this growing fear, there was also a profound sense of empowerment. For the first time, she felt as if she had a degree of control over her life, over the outcome of this living nightmare. In her own way, Janice was undergoing her own transformation, mirroring Colleen's earlier metamorphosis. But unlike Colleen, Janice was not being molded by a tormentor. She was being shaped by a newfound resolve, a determination to fight back. Janice's once dormant will, suppressed under Cameron's iron fist, had been reignited. Now, it was not just about survival, but also about rebellion, about fighting back. It was a dangerous, terrifying path, but one that Janice knew she had to tread. There was a tangible shift in the atmosphere within the isolated household. It was as though a silent battle of wills was unfolding, unspoken but palpable. As Janice's resistance grew stronger, she made sure to keep it hidden under a veil of fear and subservience, always careful not to arouse Cameron's suspicions. In her quiet rebellion, Janice found a newfound sense of strength, an unexpected ally in Colleen. As they began to form a silent alliance, the seed of hope began to grow. Finally, there came a day when Janice saw an opportunity. Cameron was away on one of his unpredictable outings, leaving the women alone. Heart pounding in her chest, she approached the box, quietly unlatching it. She saw the fear in Colleen's eyes, the same fear she had seen in the mirror countless times. But now, there was something more. A spark of hope. It mirrored her own.
"Colleen,"
she whispered, her voice trembling.
"It's time."
Her words hung in the air, a promise of the storm to come. The fear, the uncertainty, the danger, it was all real and imminent, but so was the hope. For the first time in a long time, there was a possibility of freedom, of an end to the nightmare. The air in the house felt heavy, a palpable tension clinging to every corner, every shadow. Colleen glanced at Janice, her eyes wide and filled with a mix of fear and determination. "It's time," Janice had said, and the gravity of those words had made their dream of escape real, tangible. They knew they couldn't afford a misstep. Timing was crucial, the margin for error non-existent. But there was no turning back, not anymore. Colleen's heart pounded in her chest as she watched Janice busy herself around the room, gathering whatever they could use: a worn-out map, a small kitchen knife, some food and water. The items were meager, but they were all they had. Each object was a key to their survival, to their freedom. While Janice gathered, Colleen's job was to watch, to listen for the dreaded sound of Cameron's truck pulling into the driveway, for the creak of the front door that would signal his return. Every sound, every rustle of the wind outside sent her heart into overdrive. But the house remained eerily silent. The universe, it seemed, was holding its breath with them. Their actions were hurried but deliberate, movements honed by the desperate desire to survive. Their plan was simple, but the risks were enormous. And yet, the thought of staying, of surrendering to a lifetime of fear and subjugation, was even more terrifying. So they moved. They planned. They prepared for the most important journey of their lives. As they finished their preparations, Janice turned to Colleen, her hand gripping the makeshift bag of supplies. Her voice barely a whisper, she said,
We can do this, Colleen. We have to.
The reality of their situation hit Colleen then, a wave of terrifying clarity. She was about to risk everything for a chance at freedom, and despite the fear, the uncertainty, she realized she wouldn't have it any other way. And so, as the house creaked and sighed around them, as the minutes ticked by, they waited. Waited for their chance to escape the nightmare. Waited for their chance to live again. The minutes stretched into hours as Colleen and Janice waited in the oppressive silence, their every sense alert, their bodies taut with anticipation. The only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock, a merciless reminder of the time slipping away. As the night deepened, casting a gloom over the house, their opportunity finally arrived. The droning hum of Cameron's truck faded into the distance, the low rumble a signal of their impending chance. It was now or never. Janice rose to her feet, her eyes meeting Colleen's. In the dim light, they exchanged a nod, a silent pact sealed between them. A pact of survival, of defiance. Their escape began in earnest. They moved like shadows, tiptoeing through the house, their breath held in fear of making the slightest sound. Colleen could feel her heartbeat drumming in her ears, each beat a deafening roar in the silence. They reached the front door, the cool night air seeping through the cracks and raising goosebumps on their skin. Janice slowly turned the knob, the slight creaking noise seemingly echoing through the house. They slipped outside, the door closing behind them with a soft click that nevertheless sounded like a gunshot in the quiet night. The world outside was an unknown territory, the darkness concealing the familiar landscape. The chill of the night seeped into their bones, the frigid air a shocking contrast to the stifling heat of the house. But the cold was a small price to pay for freedom. They made their way to the edge of the property, their steps careful, their movements wary. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig felt like a declaration of their defiance, a signal of their escape. As they reached the tree line, Colleen paused, casting a final glance at the house, a haunted silhouette against the moonlit sky. This place, this nightmare, had been her prison. But tonight, it would become a memory, a symbol of the past she was leaving behind. With that, they disappeared into the woods, swallowed by the darkness, embarking on the treacherous journey towards freedom. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows, its dense foliage serving as a cloak for their escape. The canopy above allowed little moonlight to filter through, cloaking their path in near-complete darkness. The bitter cold seeped through their thin clothes, sending shivers down their spine, but it did little to slow their determined pace. They navigated their path using the scant light from the crescent moon, the faint illumination barely enough to make out the outlines of the looming trees. The rustling leaves whispered tales of danger, while the eerie calls of nocturnal creatures filled the air, their discordant symphony a constant reminder of the perilous journey they had embarked on. A sudden snapping sound behind them jolted them out of their thoughts. Both women froze in their tracks, hearts pounding in their chests. Was it a small animal scurrying in the undergrowth, or a signal of their pursuers closing in? A chill ran down their spine, the fear of being caught tangibly looming over them. Then they heard it, the distant hum of a truck engine. The sound was muffled by the forest, but to their heightened senses, it was deafening. Cameron had returned. The hunter had discovered his prey had fled. With renewed desperation, they pressed on, their every instinct screaming at them to run, to put as much distance between them and their nightmare as possible. The foliage scraped against their skin, drawing blood, but the pain was a distant sensation compared to the terror driving them forward. Their world became a blur of adrenaline and fear, the forest around them turning into a treacherous maze. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, their lungs burning with exertion. Yet, the chilling dread of the truck's hum echoing through the woods spurred them on, propelling them deeper into the treacherous wilderness. Ahead, a glimmer of hope emerged amidst the darkness. A distant faint glow filtered through the dense canopy of leaves. The main road. the lifeline to the outside world, to salvation. With the promise of freedom merely yards away, they surged forward, every ounce of their strength poured into this final stretch. The dull hum of the truck became a threatening roar in the background, the sinister soundtrack to their desperate race against time. The gravel crunched under their feet as they staggered onto the deserted road, the starkness of the open space blinding after the cloak of the forest. Behind them, the foliage rustled menacingly, the specter of their nightmare lurking just beyond their sight. But ahead, the road stretched into the distance, an open route towards freedom. The wail of the truck's horn filled the air, its echoes slicing through the night like a deadly predator closing in on its prey. But there was no turning back. Not now. Colleen and Janice clung to each other, their wide eyes reflecting the blinding headlights that pierced the darkness, the truck's monstrous silhouette emerging from the forest. Their every instinct screamed at them to flee, but their bodies were rooted to the spot, frozen by terror. Suddenly, from the other direction, another set of headlights appeared. A late-night traveler, oblivious to the drama unfolding. The women watched in paralyzed horror as the two vehicles hurtled towards each other, a fatal collision imminent. Then, in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the world erupted into chaos. The deafening screech of tires, the blinding lights, and the ear-splitting collision. The impact jolted them out of their stupor, and they watched in shocked silence as the truck spun out of control, its menacing form now a mangled wreck. As the dust settled, the reality of the situation started sinking in. They had escaped. They had survived. Their nightmare was finally over. The relief that washed over them was overwhelming, a potent mixture of disbelief, euphoria, and sheer exhaustion. But there was no time to celebrate. The sound of approaching sirens sliced through the night air, the flashing red and blue lights painting the scene with a surreal glow. Janice grabbed Colleen's hand, her eyes filled with resolve. They had made it this far, but their journey wasn't over yet. They needed to make it to the authorities, to ensure their captor was brought to justice. With one last glance at the twisted wreckage of their past, they turned away, stepping into the new dawn of their freedom. Their hearts were heavy with the weight of their ordeal, but also with hope, for they knew they were walking into a future where they were no longer victims, but survivors. The police station was abuzz with activity, the harsh fluorescent lights stark against the quiet darkness outside. Colleen and Janice huddled together, their eyes wide and exhausted as they retold their harrowing story. Each word was a struggle, each memory a fresh wound, but they persisted, their voices growing stronger with each horrific detail. Their captor's face, the shackles, the box, they laid bare the atrocities they had survived, their testimonies echoing in the sterile silence of the room. The officers listened in horrified silence, their professional stoicism barely concealing the shock and disgust creeping into their faces. They took notes, collected evidence, and set the wheels of justice in motion. But beneath the routine procedure, there was an unspoken understanding. This was not a case they would soon forget. Outside, the first rays of dawn painted the sky with gentle hues of pink and orange. As Janice and Colleen stepped out of the police station, they were greeted by the quiet serenity of a new day. They looked at each other, their faces pale and drawn, but their eyes sparkling with an unspoken promise of resilience and hope. Hand in hand, they walked towards the sunrise, their shadows stretching behind them, a physical manifestation of the nightmare they were leaving behind. Their bodies were battered, their spirits bruised, but they were unbroken. Their journey to freedom had been a testament to their resilience, their survival a defiance against the monstrous cruelty they had endured. Their road to recovery would be long and painful, filled with challenges and heartache, but they would face it together, their shared trauma forming an unbreakable bond between them. Their story was a reminder of the worst that humanity could do, but also of the strength that could emerge in the face of such darkness. And so, they moved forward, their hearts alight with the promise of healing and redemption. They had endured unimaginable torment, but they had emerged not as victims, but as survivors. The road ahead was uncertain, but they faced it with a resilience born of their ordeal. The nightmare was over. The healing had begun. As our story comes to a close, let the lull of this soothing ambiance continue to cradle you further into your journey of calmness and rest. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your relaxation and sleep routine tonight. Remember, each day brings a new story, and each night brings a fresh chance to regenerate, to dream, and to become more of who you are. Good night, dear listener. Until our next story, sleep well and dream beautifully.